Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. Today we're going to be jumping back into our advanced blog and CMS series. The goal of today's video is to create an API endpoint to check if our blog post URLs are unique. So as you can see here, as we automatically create a new post, we generate a slug automatically. Well, the one problem with this is if we create a slug that is not already unique, and the user saves it, that will cause a problem. So what we want to do is before we show them the slug that we've generated, we want to see if it's unique. And if it's not unique, we need to do something to make it unique and then check to make sure that's unique before we show it to the user. So there's a couple steps in today's video. First, we're going to make our API endpoint that actually checks if the blog post is unique. Once we get that done and we test it and make sure it works, then we can go over to our Vue.js component and integrate that endpoint into our Vue.js component so that whenever we update that slug, that we check to see if it's unique and we adjust it to make it unique if it's not. So that's the goal of today's video. Let's jump into the code and get started. So we're going to be getting started by creating an API endpoint today, and we'll make sure that's all working so we can put that behind us and then just focus on the Vue.js component. So inside of our API.php, this is inside of routes. So this is our API routes for our project. And I went ahead here and just kind of made one minor change before before I filmed it. But basically we created a group here. So if you're looking from the previous video, this was basically our user function. So this was a GET request, I think, and it was /user, right? So all we did is just change that. So I just changed this to be a group, and that way we can put everything inside of here. We'll have this auth API middleware attached to it, okay? And then we can have a different group down here if we end up having a different type of middleware we want to use that's not the token-based API that we're using right now. Okay, and so then everything we make inside of here will be wrapped with that API token authentication that we've set up, and we can just add as many of those as we want. So let's create an endpoint now. We're going to create one, and everything is already going to be /API, so keep that in mind as well. So we'll have /API/posts/ I'll just make one called /unique. This is the way we check if our post is unique. After that, we're going to tell it where to go. I'm going to create a post. Well, we already have a post controller, but I'm going to put it in the post controller, and I'm going to create a function called API check unique. Now, there's a lot of ways that people like. I'm just create a name real quick. API.posts.unique. There we go. Okay, so there we go. We have a name, API.post.unique. So now the way that I like to handle this is I like to just keep my API requests inside the same controller that they're basically manipulating. So in this case, this is working with the posts. So I like to have an API request inside of my post controller. Some people like to do like a post API controller. So they'll do something like this to have all their API requests that relate to posts in a separate controller. It really just depends on what you want to do. This is how I like to do it. Okay, so now that we have that created, let's go into our controller and make it happen. So let's go into that post controller. And then I'm at the bottom here, I'm going to create that method. So we'll do public function API check unique. And then we're also going to need the request. There we go. Okay, so there we go. So now we have our check unique function. So that's great. Now let's go ahead and actually run it. So we're going to just simply do a return statement. We're going to grab posts where slug column is equal to, oops, I'm doing this backwards, equal to the request slug. And then we want to just see if it exists. All right, so what this is going to do is this statement is just going to look to see if because we did exists, it's just going to see if there is what the slug we're passing in, if there is a slug equal to it or not. And it's going to pass in true or false. True if it doesn't exist, and false if it does exist. What we're going to do then is we actually want it to be the opposite. The way that I like to do it, I want it to be the opposite because if you think about it, API check unique, you're checking to see if it's unique. So you would expect it to return true if it is unique and false if it's not unique. Whereas right now, we're checking to see if it exists. So it's actually flip-flopped. It's returning true if it exists, which means that it's not unique because it exists, so it's not unique. And then it's returning false if it is unique and it doesn't exist. So we want to flip-flop it. So that's why I like to put the exclamation point up there. or the bang, whatever you want to call it, JSON. And then we're going to encode this real quick, just so that if you don't encode it, you're actually going to get an error because you can't pass in a true and a false value randomly inside of a payload. So it's going to cause an HTTP error. Now, if you were just passing in a string, you don't need to JSON encode it technically, but it's always a good idea too anyway. Okay, there we go. That's everything we really need for our check unique function. Now let's go ahead and test this in the HTTP client to see if it works before we integrate it. Okay, so here we are. We're inside of our thing. We've got devmarketer.dev/API/posts/unique. Okay, because that's the URL we created. Now that we've created that, let's go ahead. We've already got our API token here, and then we need to create another query parameter called slug, and we will set it equal to new post. All right, that's the slug we're currently trying to test. And as we were changing what we want to test, we obviously just changed that value here. Okay, so we'll just test that the new post exists, and we have our API token here. Now let's just head over to our database real quick. I want to show you that I went ahead and created I created a blog post that has the slug of new-post. So that does exist. So this would not be unique when we run this test. We would expect it to return false because it's not unique. There's already one that exists. Okay, and then the last thing I got to get is our actual API token. So we're going to users. I'm just going to grab this super administrator API token and check it. In fact, actually, we didn't create, this should work, but let's go ahead and put this in here and click send. Oh, post not found. So here you can see controller post not found. We have a few things we got to fix. So we created this is great. There's a few things I wanted to fix, which is first of all, up here, we need to import the post. Second of all, I actually want to add some middleware here. So let's, okay, so those are all the roles that we want. And so now we should be able to authenticate those types of roles. So now let's jump back over to Insomnia and run it again. Still got an error, at post not found. Oh, we don't have a freaking model called post. Okay, that's random. Let's do that. Okay, so there we go. Make a model named post. I don't know how we didn't have that before. We never integrated that. Okay, so now we have it. So now let's try it once more. Send it again. And there we go. So now we get false because we know that it already exists. This new-post already exists. Now let's do new-post-1 and see if that works. Click it again. Now that's unique. So we get true. Perfect. So this is working the way we want it to work. If we just do something like /new, it would also be true. But again, you check that new-post and it's not true. Perfect. So we get false. Also, if we go ahead and check to see that validation works, let's grab a normal subscriber. So he should not have access to check if it is unique. So let's go ahead and add his API token and click send. And we don't. He doesn't have access to that it's valid. Okay, so what we do want to do though here is, we'll fix that later. Okay. I'll add a GitHub request. Okay, so now our API point works. So that's working. Now what we need to do is actually integrate it into our Vue.js component. All right, so now that we're inside of our Vue.js component, let's go ahead and make this so that it works. So we have our endpoint, we know where to hit it. Now we just need to make it work in our component. Now, if you come down here to kind of the nuts of our Vue.js component, you can kind of, I thought about lots of different ways to do this. And the thing that made the most sense to me was to basically refactor this a little bit so that every time we set the value of slug, we actually do it through a setter method. This is a very common way to do a lot of stuff with programming in general. And that is to, instead of setting this property directly, since we need to ensure that certain things are valid when we set that property, we would set it through a setter method. We need to create that, but we would create a setter method and then we would run that setter method to set the property and then let that method handle any validation or verification that needs to be done instead of manually setting it like you see here where we just say this.slug equals and we just set the value of it. The reason that's going to be good is then after it runs through that method, the method will, once it verifies it and knows that it's unique and all that stuff, once it's gone through and ran, it's going to be the one that actually sets the value for slug, at which point then we're actually emitting the slug changed event back to the parent. And then every time the parent gets it, it's going to be a valid, unique URL. Okay, so that's kind of the goal. So let's create a setter method to work with here, and that's what we're going to add our logic in. So we only have to add it once. Keep seeing it dry. Do not repeat yourself by having it all inside that one method. And then we'll just pass the value we want into that method in order to set the value and leave all the logic up to the setter method. So down here, we're going to create that. We're going to call set slug, and that's going to actually be our setter method. Pass in a function. We do want to accept a value here. We're just going to call it new val. That new val is going to be the basically the value we want to set the string equal to, or we want to set the slug equal to. So then this is going to contain our logic inside of here. So we're basically going to start off by, it'd be handy to go ahead and extrapolate this where we actually slugify the value. We could extrapolate that out into this method here. So we would slugify the new val, then we would go ahead and we would test to see if it's unique. We'll do that through an Ajax request. And then we would, if it's unique, then set the slug. If not, then we need to customize the slug to make it unique and test again. All right, so that's kind of the method that we're going to be running here. So we're going to get the value, set it, then we want to test it if it's unique using our endpoint. If it's unique, then great. We go ahead and set the slug, and then that'll also then, because the slug is being watched, so it's also going to emit our event. So it's going to go ahead and do that. In fact, you could actually get rid of this watch event now and we could just pull this emit into here, which is actually what we should do. So let's go ahead and put that up here as well. So we'll say, hey, if it's unique, then set the slug and emit event. And now we don't need to have our watcher here, which is actually going to be pretty good. All right, and then if it's not unique, then what we want to do is we want to change it to make it unique and then run it again. So in our case, we'll just keep it simple. We'll say like new post, and then if that's not unique, we'll just add a number on the back and check it again. And if that like new post 1 is not unique, then we'll just make it new post 2 or something like that. That's a simple way to do it. That's how WordPress does it, I'm pretty sure. If you duplicate it, I think WordPress just keeps adding a number on the back just until it gets unique. So that's how we're going to handle it. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take our new value and let's go ahead and slugify it. So we're going to run, let's actually create a variable called slug that we can reference inside of this function. And that'll just be kind of the current slug we're working with. And that's not don't to be confused with this .slug, which is the universal slug version. Okay, so we're just going to have this, the normal slug is the slug that's contained inside of this little method. So we'll have this slug equals, and we'll start off by setting it equal to the slugified using our slug method, this dot new val. We don't need this, we just need new val. Okay, so we're basically just going to grab the value that gets passed in, we're going to slugify it. After that, we can test if it's unique. Let's go ahead and just clarify how this is going to work. So then down here, you can see we have our debounds method up. If it's not being edited, here's where we take this value as slug and we set it equal to the convert title. Now what we would really do in this case is we're going to use set slug, and then we're going to pass in the value that we want to set it equal to. So like convert title, like that. So that's kind of what we want to do. So then anytime we set slug, we're just going to run the method instead of actually setting it. All right, now if you look at this .convert title, I don't think it does anything. It doesn't. All it does is slugify the title. So really, we could get rid of this convert title. We don't need it anymore. And we'll just go ahead and, because our set slug is already running the slugify method, so really we don't need to do anything. We can just actually pass in this .title into set slug, and it will do the exact same thing. So right here where we do this .convert title, let's go ahead and get rid of it. And we'll just say this .title. So now we're just passing the value of title into set slug, and now that will be in the new val. So the new val will contain the title. All right, and then we'll slugify it, and now we're basically at the same thing that convert title was doing. All right, and then up here, every time we set it, like here, this dot slug equals, so we'll just say this set slug, and then we'll just set it equal once again to title. There we go. Now when we save the slug, let's see, we're setting it equal to this dot custom slug this time, so it's a little different. So what we'll do is we'll say this dot set slug, and then we'll just say this dot custom slug. Okay, so that's going to be the same. And then up here, edit slug, let's see, that we can actually leave alone. That's okay. Perfect. Okay. Oh, and then up here we set the default value for slug equal to this dot convert title. So once again, we're going to want to do this dot set slug, and we'll do this dot title. Okay. So now everything is going to start using set slug. We're not directly modifying slug in any way. It's all happening through set slug. Okay, so here we get the basic value of slug. This is just a temporary value, and we're setting it equal to the slugified version of new val. So now we also don't need to worry about that slug method because that's being handled in here. Now let's go ahead and test if it's unique. So the way we can test this is we're going to run our Ajax request. So we'll do Axios again. We'll do our get request. We'll send it to api.use or posts.unique. And then we'll go ahead and pass in our parameters. So we'll do params, and then we'll pass in our parameters. So we need to get the API token. We need to pass that in, and then we also need to pass in our slug. All right. So slug is easy because this is the value that we want to test, and slug is equal up here. So we can just set slug to slug. That's easy. API token's a little more complicated. Now, you might instinctively think, oh, I'll just run auth user API token like we've done in the past, right? And you'll just do that to grab the current API token. The problem is this doesn't work because we're inside of a Vue component. We're not inside of Laravel. There's no Laravel being ran. So when you'd use like these double curly braces, it's being rendered by Vue. It's not being rendered by Laravel. So we can't actually do this. We don't have access to any Laravel objects inside of here because we're inside of a Vue component. This is straight JavaScript, has really nothing to do with Laravel. The reason it worked before is because if we go to our main post.create page, this page, down here we've been used to where we can pass in something like that in here, but that's because we're inside of a Blade file. So Blade renders it and renders the object that it gets from Laravel. But we can't do it when we're inside of a separate slug component in there. So instead, what we're going to do is we have a couple options. First of all, we could pass it into our thing here. So we could create a property called API token and do it that way. The problem with that is then you would have to remember to set it. When you're up here creating the slug widget, we would have to remember to do API token equals, and then we'd have to set it equal to something, to the Laravel thing. So then we would do this here, just like we had talked about. So that's one way, and that will work. But then if you have multiple of these widgets or whatever, you just have to remember to do that every single time. Otherwise, the item would fail to render. This slug widget would fail to render. But then we would have access to it in here, and that's great. You have to be careful not to overuse what we're about to do. Only do what we're about to do if you absolutely have to, because the preferred way of getting data into our component is to use properties, which is what we're doing up here. That's the preferred way to do it. However, what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to reach outside of our component and manually get a parent property. So we're actually going to go into this Blade file, and we're going to get a property from the data object here. So what we'll do is create an API token, and then we'll go ahead and do exactly what we've been talking about here, API token, and we'll be rendering it through Blade, so that way it's updated for each user, and it's going to be equal here into our data component. Now, instead of manually passing it in here where we might forget to do it, I'm just going to have the component reach outside of itself, go to the parent component, grab that value and pull it back in by itself without using properties. So it's really frowned upon to do this unless you absolutely have to. The method does exist because there are times where you need to use it, and this is a good case to do that, okay? So we're gonna be doing it like this, but I just wanted to mention that because even though I'm gonna show you guys how to do this, you only wanna do it if it's necessary. The preferred way of getting data into your components is using properties, okay? That way you have a lot better control. You also can validate it. There you can set optional or required values or default values and stuff like that. You don't really want to reach out here unless you have to. In our case, it's actually what makes the most sense. So to go out into our parent component, we would go into this.parent, and then we can grab API token from the parent object, okay? So this is something that you can do. Now, what we're actually gonna do is slightly different. We're gonna do root just because in case there's another component that's a parent of this. For example, let's say you just had a nested component inside of here, like, I don't know, you're putting this inside of the WYSIWYG editor, which is probably going to be a component as well. So in that case, you have the parent would actually be the WYSIWYG editor. Since you don't know what it's going to be, we're just going to say we always want to go to the root object in this case instead of the parent object. And the root object would be the actual, that's going to be like on your HTML template, the file that it's being rendered in, which is this is the root object. So that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna say this root API token, we're gonna set API token to that, okay? So anyway, there's that. I wanted to give you guys the lecture on just to be careful about that, but there, now you have it. So then down here where we get the API token, what we're gonna do is we're gonna tell it to get the API token from, we're gonna say this.API token, which represents this one up here, okay? Because this represents this up here. In fact, actually, we're not going to have access to this now that I think about it, because we're inside of Axios. Oh, I think this one actually would work, but we're going to have problems later. So what we're going to do also is we're going to say, we're going to create another object. We're going to do VM for view model, and we'll just say view model equals this. That way that as we get deeper into these other functions, like your promises and stuff, where this isn't going to work anymore, we'll just reference this by the VM. So we'll just say, in this case, we'll say API token equals VM.API token, and then slug equals slug. That's fine because slug is available outside of all that. Okay, so now that we have that, what we can do is we can do then, and this is if it's successful. Then what we're going to do is grab function response. And then we'll also set up another one. We'll set catch function error. Okay, now for this, I'm just going to go ahead and console log the error if we have a problem. We might want to do something better long term, but that's okay for now. Then for the then function, this is where we actually want to be doing these two things inside of the then function. So now the request came back correctly. Don't get confused with our request coming back and saying it's not a unique value and in returning false. That has, it's going to go into the then function regardless because the actual request was successful, even if it came back saying that our item is not unique, right? So it's always going to come into then unless there's an actual problem or error with the HTTP request. Okay, so now inside of here, we have to check to see whether it came back as true or false. So what we'll say is we'll just say if response.data, which should be, if we go back to Insomnia once again, and we were to send this, okay, well, we don't have this. I thought this would be easier. Users. Okay, so here where we get our value is going to be false. Response.data will represent this here, which in our case is false or true. So we'll just say if response.data, then that means that it's true, which means it is unique. So if it's unique, then it's okay, because all we need to do is we need to just set the value of slug now. So we're just going to say that vm.slug equals, and we're going to set it equal to slug, which is this value up here. Now, if it's not, we'll just say else, which we can just assume that it came back false. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to customize the slug and test it again. So to do that, what we're actually going to do is we're going to make this kind of recursive. We're going to call the function again within itself. That's how we're going to basically loop through this and keep it synchronous. So we'll just say this vm.setSlug in order to call this setSlug method again. And then we're going to go ahead and pass in the value that we want to run again. All right, so let's see here. How are we going to handle this? Also, while I'm up here and thinking about it, let's also remember to move. We're going to emit this right here and do it here. Okay, so we're setting the value of slug, and then we're going to emit that slug changed event. All right, and that way we don't need to have that watcher, so that'll just keep it a little more performant. Okay, so now down here, what we're going to do is we're going to set up a recursive value. So what we'll do is we will pass in new value again. So we're going to pass in the same value that we tested this time, but what we'll do is we'll also add a counter to it. Okay, so we will count up here at the top. Let's set up a second property called count. And we'll set this by default equal to 0, so we don't have to worry about it. So the first time you enter this slug, it'll be 0. Well, then what we'll do here is we'll actually go ahead and say count plus 1 to increase the count to number 1. And then we will modify the slug to add that count to the end of its value. So here where we set slug, we'll say slug new value, and then we'll test, we'll say plus, we'll do a ternary operator here, and we'll just say if count is greater than 0, then what we want to do is we want to return the value of count. And if it's not, then we'll just return an empty string. And actually what we need to do in here is do we'll do a hyphen and then the value of count. That should also convert it to a string. Okay, so we're just going to do basically like if new value is new post, this would be new post, and then count would be more than 0. So then it would be new post dash, and then the value of count, which is 1 or 2 or whatever. And that way, we don't really need to add a lot more logic here. It's just going to automatically be the whatever value. So then our new slug value is now new post dash 1, and then it's going to run through this again, run another API request. This time it's going to set it equal to new post dash 1 is the slug it's going to check, and then we'll see if that one's value. If there's already a new post dash 1, then it's going to come down here. It's going to set it equal count now to 2, run through it again, and now we're going to be checking new post dash 2, and then keep doing that until we find a valid one. So that's what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and do it. So we might also change this 250 milliseconds to 500 just to kind of reduce some load on our server. Okay, yeah, I think I'm just looking through everything. I think we're good to go. All right, let's do it. So let's head back over to our browser and test this out. So here we are in our browser. We'll refresh. Just make sure there's no errors before we continue. There is an error. Okay, the server responded to the status of 401. Hold on, let's check out the network. And unique slug, 401 unauthorized. We're not passing in our, let's see here. Okay, something's going wrong with the axios.get params API token vm.api token. Okay, so I think what's happening here is that this drives me crazy. I'm actually going to write in and figure out if there's a better way, because this drives me crazy. This happens a lot. It seems like methods run once no matter what in Vue.js. So they run at the very beginning. And then on top of that, it also seems like methods seem to mount before your data objects get set, which is also weird. And so I'm not a big fan of that. It seems like I don't really want to run this method right at the beginning. And I don't like that Vue.js seems to do it automatically. So if you guys know the answer to this, leave a comment down below because I am dying to know. If not, I'm actually going to follow up with some Vue.js people and see if there's a reason for this. But basically, when you first have all of your methods run through like one time, whenever you're component is built, and I think I'll see your main component as well. Whenever it gets built and it comes live, all your methods run at least once, and then they wait to be ran. And I really don't like that, because I'll build methods sometimes where I don't need them to be ran. I just need them, which is why you see me doing things like wrapping them in if statements and stuff. Anyway, this is the solution for right now until I can find a better one, is that we test to see whether the API token exists and the slug exists. And if so, then we go ahead and we run the Ajax request. And if not, we just ignore it. That's basically my solution right now. And I really want to have a better one, but I just don't have one at this point. Okay, so we're going to check this dot API token, and then make sure there is one. And then we'll also check this dot slug. Or no. We'll just check slug. Okay, so we're going to check that, and then we'll wrap everything inside of this Ajax request. So let's put this up here like that. Okay, now I think it should run. Oops, I accidentally closed it. Okay, we don't get the error. And we haven't ran an API request yet, so that's good. Let's mount this down below and run this. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do this. So we'll do new post. I took a pause there. So we had our 500 millisecond pause, so we sent our request. When we sent the request, you can see, yeah, we passed in the API token and the new slug. So that's good. And then we got back true, which means that our value got passed in as new-p, which now should also be set on the root instance. Our title, or our slug, is not set. Did it not emit our... That's weird. Did it not emit our event? Oh, we did this. We had to do vm.emit. Okay, so there we go. Oh, and then also vm.slug. Or we could just set slug. Let's just set slug. Since we just set it here, that way we don't need to go out to the main object and grab it. Okay, so now let's try it once more. So let's just refresh. Real quick, we're gonna check that there's notice I'm filtering here with XHR requests, so I'm only looking at Ajax requests. You'll see stuff, if you guys are looking at yours, you'll probably see a whole bunch of crap here because you're doing other HTTP requests for fonts and stuff like that. I'm filtering it just to XHR requests, so we only see Ajax requests in here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run it. So we're gonna do like new p again for new post. Strange that we didn't see any. There we go. Okay, so we did run one, and we had our slug as new p. Say it came back good, and it should come back true. Let's come over to Vue and refresh this, and there we go. We have our new slug. I don't know why this little component gets glitchy sometimes. Okay, great. So now let's go ahead, and our slug widget should be that too. So now let's go through and set it a little more. So we're going to do new post, and notice how it does new-post-1, which new-post-1, if we go to our root object, it's also new-post. So everything's working in sync. That's really good. Okay, but if we go to our network, you can see we ran two requests. So we ran our new-post. That came back as false, and then we come down here and we ran it as new-post-1, and that one came back true. So now new-post-1 is the valid URL. And all of that happened very dynamically. So if we just get rid of that, we have another request, came back true, so it set it to new-pos. And if we go back to new-post, now it adds that -1, and notice we did two more API requests. One, which was false, which had our original new post, and then one, which was true, came back true after we set it back to new-post-1. Now the reason that is because we should have in our post here, we have already a new-post slug. That's why it didn't come back true. So now let's duplicate this real quick, and let's just set this. We'll do new-post-1, and just for fun, Let's set another one, which is new-post-2. So now if we do the new-post slug, we would expect it to come back as new-post-3. So let's refresh and try it again. Actually, we didn't need to refresh because, oh well, we didn't need to do that. New-post, and there we go, new-post-3. And you can see, unfortunately, it does run a whole bunch of API requests. If we wanted to refactor this, I guess I didn't think about this, but one way we could refactor it is we could actually just do like unique into PHP, and then we could have had PHP just return us back. Yeah, we could have done that. We could have had PHP figure out what a unique post was and just return back a unique post for us. So then basically instead of returning true or false, it would return the valid post. So if we passed in new-post and that was unique, it would just return new-post, and we would set that. If it came back, if PHP took it and it wasn't unique, it would add the 1, it would add the 2, it would add the 3 until it finds it not unique, and then return back the new-post-3, and then we could set it equal to that. So that's another way to do it, I guess. Oh well, we've done it this way now. I don't know if it makes a big difference whether it's on the front end or the back end, but we are saving HTTP requests, so it might have been ideal to save those. But anyway, we'll just do it like this. I think this is fine. All right, let's go ahead and clean this up, and that's basically it for today's video. We've gone ahead and set that up, and it's working beautifully. All right, guys, so that's everything for today's video. I will see you guys in the next video. Be sure to download the code if you guys want. It's available on GitHub. Links down in the description. If you guys have any comments or questions about today's video, leave a comment below. If not, I'll see you guys in the next video.